On January 3, 2026, at precisely 2:01 a.m., American helicopters descended through the humid darkness over Caracas. 30 minutes later, Nicolás Maduro was in custody, and in that single night, $17.3 trillion worth of oil reserves changed hands without a single treaty being signed, without a single vote being cast, without a single congressional hearing. To the cable news anchors broadcasting from Washington and New York, this was presented as a victory against a narco-dictatorship, a triumph of democracy over tyranny. The State Department released carefully worded statements about restoring freedom to the Venezuelan people. The Pentagon displayed PowerPoint slides showing command structures of drug cartels. The rhetoric was polished, sanitized, and designed to sound noble. But if you looked past the press briefings, if you opened the ledger books of the United States Treasury, if you understood the history of empires in their final desperate stages, you would see something very different. You would see a superpower that is $36.5 trillion in debt, making the same move that every dying empire makes when the bills come due. You would see a pattern so old, so mathematically inevitable, that once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it. This pattern has destroyed the Roman denarius, the Dutch guilder, and the British pound. It has toppled civilizations that believed they were eternal. And right now, in real time, it is playing out again. The Venezuela raid is not the beginning of this story. It is a symptom. It is stage 4 of a 7-stage cycle that ends the same way every single time, with the greatest wealth transfer in a generation and the complete restructuring of the global financial order. For over 2,000 years, empires have risen and fallen following an identical sequence. It doesn't matter if we're examining Rome in 265 AD, the Dutch Republic in 1780, the British Empire in 1931, or the United States in 2026. The stages are the same. The outcome is the same. The pattern is absolute. Stage 1. Sound money foundation. Every empire begins with honest money. The currency is backed by something real. Gold, silver, hard assets that cannot be conjured from thin air. This attracts commerce like a magnet. Merchants trust the money. Trade flows through the empire's ports and markets. Wealth accumulates not through financial manipulation, but through genuine productivity. The society invests in education because it can afford to. It builds infrastructure because the tax base is broad and the treasury is full. Innovation flourishes because capital is available for entrepreneurs and inventors. This is the golden age, the period that future historians will look back on with nostalgia and wonder. Rome had this in the early empire, when the denarius contained 94% silver. The Dutch had this in the 17th century, when Amsterdam became the financial capital of the world. Britain had this in the 19th century, when the pound sterling was as good as gold anywhere on earth. America had this from 1944 to 1971, when the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Stage 2. Expansion and social programs. Once wealthy, the empire begins to grow, not just geographically, but socially. The government launches ambitious projects: roads, aqueducts, public schools, welfare systems. Initially, these programs are funded by the surplus wealth created in Stage 1. The people see tangible improvements in their quality of life. The middle class expands. Optimism is in the air. This is when the empire feels invincible. This is when its leaders believe they have discovered a new economic model that transcends the limitations of the past. They convince themselves that their prosperity is permanent, that their advantages are structural, that their dominance is destiny. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift is occurring. The empire is spending more on maintaining prosperity than on creating it. Consumption begins to outpace production. The ratio of workers to dependents starts to tilt. The cost of administrating a vast territory, paying bureaucrats, maintaining infrastructure, providing services, grow faster than the tax base can support. Rome saw this in the 2nd century AD, when the empire stopped expanding and had to maintain what it had conquered. Britain saw this in the early 20th century, when the cost of the colonial administration administration began to exceed the profits extracted from the colonies. America saw this in the 1960s, when Great Society programs in the Vietnam War were launched simultaneously, both requiring massive deficit spending. Stage 3. Military overextension and currency debasement. To maintain its global position, the empire must project power. Enemies appear on the frontiers, rival powers challenge its dominance, trade routes must be protected, allies must be defended. The military budget balloons. Taxes are raised, but they are never enough. The public begins to resist. The wealthy find ways to avoid taxation. The productive capacity of the economy cannot generate sufficient revenue to fund both the social programs and the military apparatus. So the empire makes a fateful choice. Instead of cutting spending or defaulting on its obligations, it debases the currency. In ancient times, this meant physically shaving precious metal from coins or mixing base metals with silver. In the modern era, it means printing money, expanding the money supply far beyond the growth of the real economy. The effect is identical. More currency units chase the same amount of goods and services. Prices begin to rise. The purchasing power of savings erodes. Foreign holders of the currency notice. They begin, quietly at first, to diversify their reserves. Rome did this systematically. In 64 AD, under Emperor Nero, the denarius contained 94% silver. By 100 AD, it was 85%. By 200 AD, just 50%. By 265 AD, the coin contained only 0.5% silver. It was essentially a token with a thin silver wash. And what happened to prices? They exploded by 1,000% across the entire empire. The United States did this on August 15, 1971, when President Nixon closed the gold window and severed the dollar's link to gold. The currency became pure fiat, backed by nothing but the faith and credit of the U.S. government. What followed was the inflation of the 1970s, when the dollar lost half its purchasing power within a decade. Stage 4. Desperate resource acquisition. This is the stage where the pattern accelerates. This is where we are right now. The empire realizes that its currency is losing credibility. Foreign governments are diversifying their reserves. Domestic savers are fleeing into hard assets. The illusion of stability is cracking. So the empire does what all empires do at this stage. It goes after tangible resources. Oil fields, gold mines, strategic minerals, anything with intrinsic value that can back up an increasingly hollow financial system. Military operations are reframed as humanitarian interventions or counterterrorism campaigns, but underneath the rhetoric, they are resource extraction missions. Regime change becomes about controlling oil, rare earth elements, and critical infrastructure. The British Empire did this in the late 19th century during the scramble for Africa. They weren't colonizing the Congo and South Africa out of civilizational duty. They were securing gold, diamonds, and rubber to prop up the sterling system. The United States has been doing this for decades. Iraq in 2003, oil reserves. Libya in 2011, oil and gold reserves, including Gaddafi's plan to create a gold-backed African currency. Syria, strategic positioning and pipeline routes. And now, Venezuela. Venezuela holds 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. At $57 per barrel, that is $17.3 trillion in theoretical value. It is the largest proven oil reserve on the planet, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Russia, larger than the entire Middle East combined. On January 3, 2026, the United States conducted Operation Absolute Resolve. The official narrative spoke of drug cartels and restoring democracy. The economic reality was a military operation to seize control of the hemisphere's most valuable energy asset. President Trump stated explicitly, "We're going to have our very large United States oil companies go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, and start making money for the country." Translation, we are taking the oil. But here is what the television pundits will not tell you. This doesn't fix the underlying problem. It's a band-aid on a bullet wound. Venezuela's oil infrastructure is gutted after years of mismanagement and sanctions. It would require an estimated $180 billion and 15 years to return production to peak levels. even if successful, Venezuela was producing less than 1% of global oil supply before the collapse. This is not a solution. This is stage 4 behavior, a temporary patch, a desperate grab for hard assets to create the illusion that the empire still controls real wealth. Stage 5, loss of confidence. This is the stage we are entering right now. This is when the general population begins to sense that something is fundamentally wrong. Inflation is no longer an abstract number in a government report. It is the price of milk at the grocery store. It is the cost of rent. It is the realization that wages are not keeping pace with the cost of living, that savings accounts are losing purchasing power, that the dream of upward mobility is slipping away. The middle class begins to fracture. Wealth gaps widen dramatically. Those with access to hard assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, see their net worth inflate. Those holding cash see their savings evaporate. Social cohesion deteriorates. Political extremism rises on both the left and the right. Blame is assigned. Class warfare intensifies. Meanwhile, foreign governments quietly accelerate their diversification away from the empire's currency. They don't announce it at press conferences. They do it systematically, signing bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar, accumulating gold reserves, building alternative payment systems. The reserve currency status, which provided enormous privilege in earlier stages, allowing the empire to run permanent trade deficits and export its inflation, begins to crack. Look at the data. In 2000, the US dollar accounted for 71% of global foreign exchange reserves. By 2023, that share had fallen to 59%. China and Russia are settling trade in yuan and rubles. The BRICS nations are discussing alternative settlement mechanisms. This is not collapse. This is erosion, slow but measurable. And here is the most telling indicator of all: wealth flight. In 2025, 142,000 millionaires relocated internationally, the highest number ever recorded. Projections for 2026 estimate 165,000 millionaires will leave traditional wealth centers, the largest voluntary migration of private capital in modern history. Where are they going? The UAE, Singapore, Switzerland, countries with zero or low income tax, political stability, and asset-friendly legal systems. This is capital fleeing instability. The wealthy, who have access to the best information and the best advisors, are voting with their feet. Stage 6. Fiscal dominance. This is where the mathematics become inescapable. This is where the debt grows so large that it begins to dictate all policy decisions. The United States national debt currently stands at $36.5 trillion. It is growing by $6.2 billion per day, every single day. That is $258 million per hour, $4.3 million per minute, $71,000 per second. Interest payments on that debt just crossed $1 trillion annually for the first time in American history. That is more than the entire defense budget. It is triple what the government was paying in interest just 5 years ago. By 2035, under current projections, interest payments will consume $1.8 trillion per year. The Congressional Budget Office projects that under current law, the debt will reach 156% of GDP by 2055. Under alternative scenarios, if tax cuts are made permanent, if spending increases continue, the debt could reach 220% of GDP. And here's the trap. The Federal Reserve is now stuck between two impossible choices: raise interest rates to fight inflation, but higher rates on $36.5 trillion of debt would make the interest payments catastrophic, potentially consuming the entire federal budget within a decade. Keep interest rates low to make the debt serviceable, but low rates destroy the currency's purchasing power and fuel asset bubbles that eventually explode. This is called fiscal dominance. The debt is so large that it dominates monetary policy. The central bank can no longer set rates based on economic conditions. It must set rates based on what the government can afford to pay. Former Fed Chair Janet Yellen warned about this on January 5, 2026. She said, "The preconditions for fiscal dominance are clearly strengthening." She explained that if investors lose faith that the U.S. will ever return to running budget surpluses, they will demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk. Higher rates on unpayable debt. This is the death spiral. Stage 7. Collapse and reset. We are not here yet, but the pattern says this is coming. History gives us a time frame. Once fiscal dominance sets in, the collapse phase typically takes between 5 and 25 years. Some economists, like Kent Smetters from the Penn-Wharton budget model, project the breaking point around 2050. Others believe it could happen sooner if confidence breaks suddenly: a failed bond auction, a sovereign debt crisis, a loss of reserve currency status. The final stage always involves one of two outcomes: hyperinflation or default. There is no third option. Hyperinflation is when the government prints money to pay its debts, destroying the currency's purchasing power. Ask Weimar Germany, ask Zimbabwe, ask Venezuela. Printing money doesn't create wealth, it transfers wealth from those holding the currency to those who print it first. Default is when the government simply stops paying. It announces that the bonds are worthless, that the promises cannot be kept. This is less common for reserve currency nations because they control the printing press. But it is not impossible. It happened to Britain in stages between 1931 and 1967. And when the reset comes, the wealth transfer is complete. Those holding currency get wiped out. Generational savings disappear in months. Those holding hard assets, gold, productive land, strategic resources, see their wealth explode in value relative to the collapsing currency. This is not a prediction. This is a historical pattern that has repeated itself for 2,000 years. Let me prove this to you with 3 undeniable examples. The Roman Empire. Rome at its peak controlled 50,000 miles of roads, built aqueducts that still function today, created a legal system we still reference. The denarius was the global reserve currency of the ancient world. But maintaining an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia was expensive. Military campaigns against Germanic tribes, Persian invasions, internal civil wars, it all required money, so Rome debased the currency. In 64 AD, the denarius was 94% silver. By 265 AD, it contained only 0.5% silver. Prices exploded 1,000% across the empire. Soldiers demanded higher wages as the coins became worthless. Emperor Caracalla raised military pay by 50% just to maintain loyalty. Rome had no more precious metals to plunder from conquered territories, so they levied crushing taxes on their own citizens. Trade collapsed. The economy shattered. Those holding land and gold survived. Those holding denarii were destroyed. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. The Dutch Empire. The Dutch guilder was the world's first modern reserve currency. In the 17th century, Amsterdam was the financial capital of the world. The Dutch East India Company was worth $7.9 trillion in today's dollars, the most valuable company in human history. But maintaining a global trading empire was costly. Naval fleets, colonial possessions, trade route protection. By the 1700s, the Dutch were overextended and heavily indebted. Then came the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1780. The British, a rising power, challenged the Dutch directly. They attacked Dutch shipping and strangled trade routes. The war bankrupted the Dutch. Debt became unpayable. Equity markets collapsed. The guilder lost its reserve currency status. Wealth transferred from Dutch holders to British holders, from the declining empire to the rising one. The British Empire. At its peak, Britain controlled 25% of the world's landmass. The pound sterling was the dominant reserve currency for over 200 years. London was the financial capital of the world. But by 1900, the cost of maintaining the empire exceeded the benefits. World War I was financially devastating. Britain borrowed heavily from the United States to fund the war effort. By 1918, Britain was a debtor nation for the first time in centuries. In 1931, Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard. The pound was devalued. World War II drained even more resources. By 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference, the US dollar became the new global reserve currency. Britain didn't let go easily. They used colonial influence to slow the transition. But by 1967, another major devaluation. The pound lost 14% of its value overnight. It took over 20 years for the pound to be completely dethroned. Those who held pound-denominated assets watched their wealth evaporate. Those who had diversified into dollars and hard assets preserved their purchasing power. Three empires. Different centuries, different technologies, different enemies. Same pattern, same stages, same outcome. The United States is currently in stage 4, entering stage 5, with stage 6 beginning to manifest. The Venezuela raid is textbook stage 4 behavior, desperate resource acquisition through military force. The wealth migration is stage 5 behavior, capital flight as confidence cracks. The fiscal dominance warnings from Janet Yellen are stage 6 reality. The debt is now controlling policy. People always say, but this time is different. They point to American technology, to AI productivity gains, to the strength of the US military. Let me address this directly. The Roman Empire had revolutionary technology for its time. The British Empire had the Industrial Revolution. Technology didn't save either empire because the problem isn't productivity. It's the relationship between spending and revenue. When spending persistently exceeds revenue by 6 to 7% of GDP annually, no amount of productivity growth solves that without painful adjustments. The US can technically print unlimited dollars, but printing money to pay debts is hyperinflation. That's not saving the system, that's destroying it differently. This time is not different. The pattern is absolute. The wealth transfer is coming. If the pattern holds, and it always has, we are heading toward a wealth transfer of historic proportions. Not tomorrow, not next month, but within the next 20 to 25 years. Those who understand this will position accordingly. Those who don't will watch their savings evaporate, just as Roman citizens, Dutch merchants, and British savers did before them. History tells us what survives these transitions: hard assets, specialized skills, geographical diversification, and networks. The January 3rd operation in Venezuela isn't the cause of the wealth transfer, it's a symptom of where we are in the cycle. When empires enter stage 4, they grab hard assets. This is desperation disguised as strength. The fact that the United States felt compelled to conduct a military operation to seize oil reserves worth $17.3 trillion tells you everything about the fiscal situation. If the system were stable, this wouldn't be necessary. This is late-stage empire behavior. This is the pattern asserting itself. The wealth transfer is coming. The only question is which side of it you'll be on. Subscribe now and stay ahead. When history is written, you'll be one of the few who saw it coming. If you think there's something we missed or a topic you want us to cover, let's discuss it in the comments.